Hello everyone, this is Marco and welcome back to my channel. Today we'll be doing something that everyone's been waiting for. I will be reviewing the Mattel Hammond Collection Giganotosaurus. I'll be doing an in-depth review just like what I did with the Tyrannosaurus Rex. So let's start from the beginning. I originally joked about Mattel doing a Hammond Collection Giganotosaurus on April 1st. I made a fake mock-up to see how many people I could trick and make them believe it was real. Some of them did actually think it was real, so much so they started to share the picture around. I heard rumors that it might have become a thing before I did the mock-up. I just kind of wanted to joke about it at the same time, but also make a mock-up of what the Hammond Collection Giga might have looked like if it was actually really accurate. And then we were all surprised by how good this new Mattel Giga looked. With the first promotional pictures being revealed, we all sort of realized that it was going to be a good figure. That being said, it is not perfect. I personally think that the Carnotaurus is the best one that they made so far, followed by the Therizinosaur and then by the Giganotosaurus. So what's the reason why it's at third place and not first place? In this video, I'll be explaining why by pointing out the good and the bad. I'll be pointing out some of the great decisions and changes that Mattel have been applying onto these new figures, and some of the things that they can improve and some of the shortcomings. All of this is done with the best intentions, and I'd like to remind you guys that having a critical mind is for the best. Pointing out legitimate criticisms is the catalyst to improve things. It goes both ways. Us, the consumers, have every right to criticize the product, and the creators and the makers have to be able to listen to their consumers. And this is exactly what Mattel has been doing, thankfully. With these newer releases, Mattel have been learning from their past mistakes, listening to the community, and amending certain aspects of their figures, which is a win for absolutely everybody. So there's two things that we all have to keep following. One is that we don't get carried away by overly criticizing some products. I know some people have been pretty aggressive with some points. It's about finding the right balance. And the second point is, Mattel, please keep listening to legitimate criticism. It's been working so far. I mean, just look at the new figures, man. Hopefully they'll just keep listening to their consumers, and hopefully we can all be productive together. Now let's get into the review. First of all, let's take a quick look at the packaging. It's exactly the same as what we would expect from the Hammond collection. We have this nice black packaging, nice and clean and straight to the point. There's some nice photography and renders of the figure itself. Hammond collection and Jurassic World logos around. A nice window so we can see the figure, and a description on the back. One thing that struck me straight away was the weight of the whole box. This figure is quite a bit heavier than some of the previous releases. It's not just the size, it's also due to the design and the materials. We'll get into that later. I'd like to thank my good friend Martin for sending this Giga out. I couldn't be doing any of my reviews or adding anything to my collection if it wasn't for you. Thanks so much. So let's open the box. After we've taken all the parts out, you'll notice that the tail is separate. And when you take it out of the box, you'll realize that that is the heavy part. The tail has been completely redesigned compared to previous releases like the T-Rex. The whole articulation inside has been rethought and redesigned, but we'll get into that later. The first thing that we can all agree upon is how nice this figure looks. And that is mainly due to all the proportions being correct. I should say most of them really. The great part about Mattel and this figure is that they've actually gotten a really nice long tail and smaller feet. And that is such a breath of fresh air, guys. This is amazing. They have acknowledged on their Beyond the Gates video that they've been paying closer attention to better proportions, and it really does show. This thing looks beautiful. It's kind of mind-boggling how this wasn't the standard with the beginning of the Hammond collection, as they were so proud of them being premium collector figures. It's nice to see that they've been learning from their mistakes and actually improving this line. It's not something everyone would do, especially if they're a big corporation. One thing we should all learn is that big corporations don't care about people. They care about money. But there is someone at Mattel that actually listens. That's a win for everyone. absolutely amazing. I'm struggling to record this because there's some really annoying seagulls outside that just won't shut up. That being said, the proportions are still not entirely accurate. Something Mattel's been consistent with is getting the size of the arms wrong. With the Carnotaurus, the arms were a bit too big, and the same thing goes with this Giga. I'm not too sure why that is. It could be due to different reasons. I've been trying to suss it out. At first I thought maybe it's due to manufacturing and articulation, but then I think about all the smaller joints that Mattel uses for the human figures and other dinosaur figures, and that clearly isn't the case, as they can use smaller joints with no problems at all. So the only conclusion I can come with is that the designers or the sculptors aren't paying close enough attention to the original source material. There could be multiple reasons. One of them is time constraints, or the other is just a plain skill issue. However, paying attention to the original source material is a sculptor's basic skill. That is sculpting 101. You need to pay close attention to the reference material and get the proportions right before moving on to the next stage. A good sculptor would know that, and us, the community, we shouldn't have to point this stuff out for them to realize. They should know this straight away. They're professionals, and at the end of the day, it's their job. They pride themselves by saying that these are premium collectors' figures, so they have to be as close to the reference material as humanly possible. So, still talking about proportions, the feet are much smaller than the T-Rex's, and this is amazing. No more clown feet with any Hammond collection figure ever. They've reduced the feet size on every single figure since the Carnotaurus, and we're all thankful for it. Another big thing that Mattel seems to have been fixing too is the width of the thighs. Previously, with other releases, the thighs were pretty much semi-spheres and they would stick out like a sore thumb, especially when you looked at it from the top and from the back. But now with this new Giga and the Carnotaurus and the Therizinosaur, they've slimmed down the thighs and they don't look goofy anymore. They look absolutely perfect. They tried to do it with Blue and Delta and the Pyroraptor. Unfortunately, the backsides are still too thick though. Don't get me wrong, it's still a big improvement, but they're still pretty bad. That is an easy fix, but I'll talk more about that in a separate video when talking about the smaller figures. So longer tail, check. Smaller feet, check. Thinner thighs, check. What's left now is smaller, more proportionate arms, closer to the reference material, and more accurate front-facing views of the heads. Yes, we'll be talking about this now. When looking at the Giga from the front, it doesn't look like the reference material at all. Carnivores have stereoscopic views. That means that from the front, their eyes should be visible, so they can clearly see their prey straight on. However, herbivores have their eyes on the side of their heads to give them a better chance at spotting a carnivore that might be hiding around them. That's generally the rule. So Mattel's Giga should be a prey, apparently. Jokes aside, this is an issue that Mattel has been having throughout the whole line. One clear example is the Triceratops, maybe even the Parasaurolophus with the bee sting head. It seems like they don't look at reference material from the front, but just from the side. This Giganotosaurus figure looks absolutely perfect from the side view, with the exception of the arms. But as soon as you look at it from the front, that's when things get a little strange. From the front, the Triceratops face is too wide. Also, it's missing a triangular horn on the frill that is dead in the center on the original reference material. The Tyrannosaurus instead has the opposite issue. The cheeks were too thin, but at least you were able to see the eyes from the front view, unlike the Giganotosaurus. So let's take a closer look and see what needs fixing on the Giganotosaurus. First of all, the midsection of the head is too wide. The whole head seems a bit too wedge-shaped. The jawline seems to be a bit too straight. Giving it a slightly thinner snout in the midsection would also help with the stereoscopic view issue, as the bone structure seems to poke out a bit too much from the face, therefore covering up the eyes from the front. So again, thinning down that section would help the Giganotosaurus see its prey. Another issue is that the eyebrow ridge doesn't poke out enough. The eyes and the ridge are roughly about the same. If we imagine a line going down from the eyebrow ridge vertically, the eyes pretty much line up with it. Instead, the eyebrow ridge should be poking out more, maybe we can thin out the eye section as well, just a little bit, and make those eyebrows pop out a little bit more. We can't attribute these issues to lack of reference material. Mattel, as stated in their Beyond the Gates, does have access to some ILM models. Also, there's plenty of images on Google Images to reference from, which is exactly what I've been using for my own sculpts and for this video review. So in my opinion, these issues can be attributed to lack of attention, or maybe, who knows, the sculptors at Mattel may not be paid enough to care as much. The next thing isn't a big issue at all, but I would just like to point it out anyway, and that is the Giga's tongue. Mattel seem to have reused the exact same tongue sculpt and mold as the Tyrannosaurus Rex, which is much wider than that of the Giga. And the Giga's tongue looks very different. It's quite unique looking. It almost looks like the tongue of a goose. It's got very sharp edges and ridges. I noticed this detail while I was sculpting the Robosaur's GIGANOTOSAURUS, which is on hold at the moment due to technical difficulties. We do, however, want to release it this year. But here's a comparison of the tongue on my Robosaur's version, the one from the film, and Mattel's version. Some people have been having issues with the glass eyes in general, but they seem to work much better with these bigger figures, so I'll give them a pass. It looks really good just from certain angles. The first thing that I noticed about the eyes is that they're a bit too small. Especially when using glass eyes, that technique makes the eyes look a little bit smaller than usual. That's due to the eyes looking a bit darker due to shadows, and darker things usually look a bit smaller than straight out bright things. If you sculpt the eyes a little bit too small and have glass eyes on top of that, it makes the eyes look really tiny. Another big thing that Mattel have been focusing on is sharper teeth, and this Giga does have absolutely perfect, gorgeous looking teeth. They're completely rubber, so they're safe, they're not rounded, they're nice and sharp, and that looks amazing. They've also added a nice wash over the teeth. Thank goodness, these are some of the best teeth I've ever seen on a Jurassic figure, ever. So we've talked about the sculpt proportions. When sculpting, there's 3 major steps. Step 1 is to block out the sculpt with all the correct proportions, long tail, smaller feet, and what have you. The next step is broad detailing. That entails all of the major skin folds, where the eyes go, the major musculature, and some of the more obvious detailing, like with the Giga, the spikes on the neck and the back. And generally speaking, with Jurassic Park dinosaurs, you'd be looking at sculpting the fenestre and the skull, and again, all of the broader, more important shapes, slowly moving from the bigger, more obvious shapes to the finer, smaller ones. Step 3 is all the detailing, all the very minute aspects of the sculpt, like all the scales, the skin texture happens here. From what I've seen throughout the Hammond collection history, and it seems like Mattel has some issues during step 1 and step 2. They've slowly been fixing the issues with step 1, like the proportions of the tail and the feet, but with step 2, that's where they seem to have some issues now. Getting the jawline right, the stereoscopic view issue, and details like getting some of the rib cage detail right, like with the baryonyx. But with the Hammond collection, Mattel seemed to be excelling at step 3. All the detailing has been incredibly crisp and accurate. There is one instance where step 3 wasn't followed correctly, and that was with the belly texture on the Tyrannosaurus. But since then, everything has been absolutely spot on with the little details. They've even sculpted the scar on the side of the mouth, some cuts and scratches in the skin on the snout, and every single little scale is in its correct place. If we go down from the head to the neck, all of those scoots on the top of the neck are perfect. All the little scales and wrinkles in the skin too. Going down to the body, the scales get bigger on the back. You get some nice detailing on the spikes on the back too, and everything looks gorgeous. Same with the detailing on the arms. The legs look fabulous too. There's some bigger scales towards the front of the thighs and some smaller ones going towards the back. The scoots are very nicely sculpted too on the toes. Again, going back to step 1 and 2, the toes and the feet do look a little bit too fat, but then the detail on it makes up for it. The detail looks incredibly exquisite. And this time the dew claw is sculpted separately. It's not been carved or sculpted directly onto the leg. It actually pokes out from the leg itself. Carrying down to the tail. The tail is so nice and long, and it's got great detailing too, just like the rest of the figure. You got some nice scoots running down the top part of the tail, some nice folds in the skin, and smaller scales going down from the midsection to the lower section. There is no soft detail at all whatsoever on the whole figure. So the next part is the paintwork. Now this is where this figure really shines. The paintwork of this figure is something else. They have gone all out. They have not left a single inch of this figure unpainted. They have even painted the dew claws, guys. This is unheard of. They've also painted some shading over the plastic itself before adding the patterns. Someone did point out that the scar on the mouth isn't painted, and I guess that could be a nitpick, but I think everything else looks so perfect that I can close an eye on that. They have even added some beautiful dry brushing on the back of the figure. Although it is in segments and it's quite noticeable, it does really add to the overall great looks of this figure. And as mentioned earlier, the teeth have a lovely wash over them too, so I must commend Mattel for that. The articulation has been greatly improved too. The thighs still lock into position, which is good because you don't want this figure to start drooping, but the rest of the joints don't, which means that we can actually pose this the way we like. All the joints are nice and strong and tight too, which is absolutely great. There is no drooping at all whatsoever. The angle at which the jaws open is a bit of a problem for me. In nature, the top jaw or the head doesn't move at all. It's the bottom jaw that moves. But Mattel seem to love adding articulation to the top jaw to give it extra movable parts, but they've been going about it wrong. First of all, they've added two separate pivot points for the top jaw and the bottom jaw, when in reality it should all be on the same axis. The pivot point for the top part of the head is on the top half of the neck, and the pivot point for the bottom jaw is on the bottom part of the neck. If they really want to make both parts of the jaws articulate, they should 100% be on the same axis, and it's totally possible. Them having different pivot points throws realism out the window, and it seems like some of the designers might need some lessons on anatomy. So not only that, but the top jaw, which shouldn't be moving much at all, actually moves a lot more than the bottom one, and it does give it a bit of an overbite when opening the mouth. They seem to be keeping this issue throughout the whole line with the bigger carnivores. We saw this first happen with the Tyrannosaurus Rex, and it's not been fixed since. So if there's something that I really asked Mattel to fix, is the jaw opening angles and the pivot points. Please, Mattel, fix that. They did change the tail articulation. It's got a lot more segments in the ball joints, and it does bend really well. You can make it bend to some really impressive curves, and they really did put a lot of love in that. The redesigned tail articulation is a lot heavier than the previous iteration, like with the Tyrannosaurus, which had about 3 or 4 different segments, but this new Giga has a lot more segments. This gives the figure somewhat of a balancing issue, and it does like to fall back sometimes, which is the complete opposite issue that Mattel seemed to have when they had shorter tail. Contrary to what people might believe, the length of the tail and the smaller size feet do not affect this whatsoever. It's literally just the weight of the materials and of the joints that they've been using in the redesigned tail articulation. Because of them redesigning the articulation, it's become a lot heavier. Although it's slightly heavier towards the back, it does stand really well anyway. I haven't had any posability issues at all. So overall, this figure is absolutely gorgeous. It might need some work here and there, but I would give it a 9 out of 10. The Therizinosaurus a 9.5 out of 10, if not a 10 out of 10. But let me know if you guys want me to review that one. But Mattel's new design philosophy is a win for absolutely everyone, and it is because of the community having a voice and letting Mattel know what we want. So guys, don't be afraid about criticizing what you love, and thank you so much, Mattel, for actually listening to the community and your fans. There's this stigma going around that we need to eradicate, and that is, if we have some criticism, people think that we hate the product. It's the exact opposite. If we have criticism towards something, it's because we want it to be better, because we love it. There's some people around telling other people to be grateful about having these figures, and we are absolutely grateful. We're loving the direction that Mattel is going with these new figures, and it is because of us having a voice. But being grateful isn't all of it. Because we are buying these figures, because we are the consumers and we are spending our money, we have every right to judge and criticize the product. Do not forget that. Imagine going to a restaurant, ordering something that you know you like, only to be disappointed and the food wasn't very good at all. It was undercooked and it didn't taste good. We don't go, oh yes, it was delicious, or you should be grateful because you've actually had some food at all. When I go to a restaurant, I'd expect at least some quality food. We know what we like, we know what we don't like. There's a reason why websites have review portals, and we can't lie to ourselves. All of this is leading into the biggest issue that this Hammond collection GIGANOTOSAURUS has had, and that is quality control issues. Since the very beginning, a lot of people have been complaining having damaged figures. Some figures were missing an eye, some figures had 2 right arms or 2 left arms, some of them had a hole in the chest, some of them had 2 left feet or 2 right feet. One of them had glue seeping out of the figure into the packaging. For a figure this expensive, these quality control issues shouldn't happen. Hopefully this will not happen in the future, and hopefully Mattel can fix this. It's a real shame because this figure is absolutely beautiful. To end this review, I'd like to thank everyone first of all for watching this video, for sticking around. I would love to give a massive thank you to Mattel. Thank you so much for listening, to your fans, to your loyal customers and consumers. We can't wait for the future. Hopefully Mattel will release some figures again like the Baryonyx with better proportions, a bigger figure, nicer teeth, and everything that is part of this new philosophy that they're adopting. In the Jurassic franchise, the Baryonyx is about the same length as the Carnotaurus, so the Hammond collection Baryonyx is way too small compared to the Hammond collection Carnotaurus, so a re-release would make sense to me. Some people have come out saying that they would like a re-release of the T-Rex with better proportions and everything, and I couldn't agree more. Anyway, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. I would like to give a massive thank you to all of my Patreons. Seriously guys, your support really does mean the world to me, as it helps me do what I love for you. You help me buy materials, and most of all, you give me a helping hand with improving the quality of the content of my videos. Even if it's just a small donation, every little helps.